So now what I want to do is take you guys through my own personal lens collection and offer some insight on each lens that I own and how I'm using them in my own studio. Hopefully if you guys can understand why I've bought all the lenses that I have and what I use them for, it'll give you a little bit of insight as to which lens might make the most sense for you. Or lenses, you are encouraged to buy more than one. Lens number one is the Sigma 35mm Art f1.4. This is my go-to lens for almost every situation, and it's a lens that I've used for virtually all of my loop videos over the past 4, maybe 5 years. I also use the 35mm Art for all of my talking segments. The video that you're watching right now was actually shot on this lens. If you like the look of this lens, but you want something a hair more versatile, the same model is made in an 18-35 zoom lens, which is a super popular choice, probably a little bit more popular than the 35 prime that I use. My buddy Austin Burcham of ABB Drums actually uses 2 of those lenses in his studio. Jealous. Both the 35mm prime and the 18-35mm zoom Sigma Arts are definitely solid options for a first lens, and you'll have tons of creative options with a lens that's in this focal range. Lens number 2 is the Sigma 14-24mm Art f2.8. This is one of my newer lenses, and this thing is absolutely beautiful. I love this lens. Aside from being really wide, the unique thing about this lens is really the low f-stop, or that low aperture, all the way down to f2.8. That low of an f-stop is not super common on lenses this wide. Many times they only go down to 5.6 or maybe f4. But an aperture of 2.8 allows for some really pretty depth of field while still maintaining that artistic curve of a wide angle lens. Definitely a fun lens to get creative with, and 14mm is plenty wide to get things like overhead shots or any shot where we need to see the whole room, the whole kit, or the whole studio. Lens number 3 is my Sigma 50mm f1.4. And this is not a Sigma Art series lens, so it's a little bit cheaper than the others, which is nice, but with the aperture all the way down to 1.4. This lens gets super crisp and sharp with a bit more of a flattened out feel when compared to something like a 35mm, or it's much flatter than like a 24mm. This 50mm is a great lens for interview shots or slightly more tight angles, like a hand close up or even a foot cam. Lens number 4 is the Sigma 85mm Art f1.4, and this is a big, heavy beast of a lens, and it's not one that I use for every project, but when I do use it, this lens offers some of the prettiest and most cinematic shots that I've ever captured in this studio. This lens is ultra flat and super defined and crisp on the edges, and it just has an extremely specific artistic look to it. This lens is my go-to for a lot of B-roll shots or even some snare close-ups and foot cams. If I'm trying to film something where I want it really, really tight, the 85mm is often a good choice. I would say the perspective that this 85mm lens offers you is like one of the most intimate perspectives. It just feels very pulled into what you're looking at, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that it is so flat, right? There's no bending on the edges, and it just makes it feel like you are tight up against what you're trying to show the viewer. And lens number 5 is the Sigma 105EX Macro. This lens certainly gets used the least out of all of my lenses, but I bought it for some very specific purposes. Essentially, this is a B-roll lens that excels at capturing super fine details. In my Timekeeper series on YouTube, almost all of those close-up shots of the watches were filmed with this 105 macro. Macro lenses like this allow us to capture details that the human eye just can't see, so you can produce some really stunning images if you use this thing correctly. This lens also has a really low f-stop of f2.8, so we can get really creative with our depth of field. And finally, I want to wrap this up with a quick lens buyer's guide for those of you looking to invest in some fresh glass.